Perfect. So what we're discussing is Jessalyn's research. She started some research on funeral homes and funeral directors. And we're going to talk a little bit about the process of what she found out about the process of how one would handle the death of a baby.
Yep. So I didn't really have a framework other than just getting what information I could and seeing what questions came up. Trying to observe, because you don't really anticipate what questions are going to come up until you're actually like dealing with the situation. So I reached out to two, really the main funeral service providers in Oakland, in our area right now of Uptown, North Oakland area. And that was Fauch's, which is here on Telegraph, and the Chapel of the Chimes, which is a very beautiful space. I don't know if you've ever been to the cemetery, Mountain View Cemetery. Chapel of the Chimes is absolutely gorgeous. It's very, technically they have a sanctuary and a mausoleum. They have on-site crematorium, and it's also a cemetery. And the space itself has all these ancient designs and has a very sacred feel and space to it. But I called Fauch's first because I was the least familiar with them. And I mean, the first thing you do, and I really think that this is a role that would be good for a doula if a next of kin couldn't perform it, because it really is kind of a strange consumer experience, is that you go on their website and they have a menu as a PDF of the services provided. So that menu itself is something that is morbid to look through. I mean, I'm pretty comfortable doing so just because of my personality, but if I had just gone through a loss myself personally, I can see it being incredibly difficult to just process. And so it literally will have lists of packages, packages including any kind of like physical processing of the body that needs to happen, the casket prices, service prices. There's a range of expensiveness for all of this.
Do you mind, and also touch base with yourself, it is a hard subject, so it's hard to talk about, I appreciate. Do you mind like going into what are the processes?
So yeah, I essentially just glanced over the menu and then called Fauch's, and the people who answered the phone were very kind and polite. So that usually includes embalming if there's going to be any viewing of the loved one. And embalming isn't legally required for a regular burial cremation, but if you're doing a visitation, they have to preserve the remains.
Got it.
And then if you're not doing that, there's the burial process and the cremation process. And there's also like some funeral homes offer like for lack of a better word, a green embalming process where they use they don't use formaldehyde and they use more like natural plant-based materials. So that's something that's like more common nowadays because we've found out that embalming isn't really great chemically.
Not great for the environment.
Yeah, so I called them and spoke to Fauch's. Actually called back twice because I was just trying to clarify some things. And they have a separate little section for children's services. I think partially insensitivity to the fact that when younger people die, it's usually an unexpected and sometimes more difficult process than when an elderly person passes away. So for Fauch's, they have a stillborn package, and then they have an infant package, and then they have like 2 years and older, which is kind of interesting to think about how we like monetize lifespan, and like it's really hard to quantify grief, but they have to for their process, so it's there.
Is that based upon how much time it would take to process?
I think it's based on the time because of the sizes of that vary. And I think also a lot of people do not choose to have a funeral for a stillborn or for an infant. I think that does happen where there is ceremony and ritual, but I think the way we deal with things, and I didn't like get into the cultural aspects with them on the phone, but a lot of times people aren't very open about having lost a baby. And so having a funeral might be like a big stretch. So there's a cost I'll just go by the infant or the stillborn prices. The stillborn price was $400, infant was $650, to include like receiving the baby from the hospital, and the transfer to their mortuary, any embalming and preparation, and the transportation to the cemetery or the crematory. There's also like $33 or more for papers, including death certificates. You have to buy an urn, which is anywhere from like $50 up to like hundreds, depending on what you're doing with your family. My main question about that was like, how soon do we need to call you guys? Like, does the family have to do it? Does the hospital do it for you? Like, when does this need to take place? Is there a time limit? Because, you know, families might want to spend time with the loved one. And they said that basically the family and the hospital do need to call as far as the family can have the baby removed from the hospital at any time, but the family needs to like decide when that's going to happen. And usually it's sometime right after the death. I think if the family wasn't taking action, the hospital would sometimes call just to like let them know that they have this, but there needs to be release paper signed to get it from the hospital to the next place that the body is going. The parent has to sign those release forms. And then from there, it's a matter of storing the loved one, and then any embalming or prep. And then for Fauches, they would have to transfer it to the crematorium. And sometimes, so this fee includes that, but like if you were to do it individually, like hospital directly to crematorium, you'd have to call the crematorium and get separate pricing just for that process. It's pretty wild just thinking about like even for the process of a cremation, you have to have a very specific kind of box. Like it doesn't have to be an expensive box, it can be a cardboard box, but it has to seal a certain way and close a certain way. And you know, those are things that these people know how to provide, but it's a bizarre detail to think about when you're in the middle of grieving. So again, I think a doula in this role would be really helpful because it's like logistics for planning any other event, but it's with this huge weight of loss behind it.
Sadness, yes.
And it was I wasn't like emotionally sad, but it felt very surreal and bizarre to just be like casually discussing prices with the person on the phone. And like, they were incredibly sweet toned and like, anything we can do to help, any other questions you have, please always feel free to call us and ask. So that I appreciated their, you know, their attitude. And that's something that Fauches pointed out is that their babies' prices don't include standard visitation. Usually renting a room for an hour or 2 or 3 hours does cost money. And the way they do it is if you have a visitation period and it's during normal business hours during the day, they just waive the fee for families who are grieving a baby.
That's very
Which is
kind.
very kind. If you want to do it in the evening, they still have to like rent the room out, so it does cost. But if you've lost a baby, had a stillbirth, and you want to do the visitation, as long as it's not outside of their normal business hours, they just include it usually because they recognize that families are going through this like very different kind of grief process. Usually this whole thing is scheduled, you know, within a day or two after the loss occurs. I asked about, because I had a family who went through not changing their mind, but like they had their baby sent to be cremated, and then like that day they like really wanted to go visit with him one more time. And so I asked, I was like, what happens if a family changes their mind or wants to come back one more time or wants to see the baby before cremation? And I think cremation is more standard at this time for little ones. She said that they can call right before the family can ask that they receive a phone call like that morning before anything happens to like check in, like, hey, like this is happening in the next 2 hours, and it's usually scheduled the day after all the paperwork is processed. So they usually do call and like confirm that everything's happening, but you can also add it kind of like a birth plan. Please make sure you call me before anything happens, even if you wanted to be at home, but like acknowledge the moment of cremation, whatever it was. So she kind of hinted that it is standard to call and communicate to the family, but it wouldn't hurt to like add it to your preferences that you be called, which kind of reminded me of hospital procedure in some ways. Like there's things that are supposed to be standard, but maybe don't always happen. And it is good to speak up for yourself and get the additional information. So, I mean, I wrote down some costs, but
Just give me the thumbnail sketch.
yeah, so let's just say for an infant loss, it's $650 for the general package, plus the cheapest urn they had listed was $85, $33 for paperwork, so that comes to about $750. Plus, if you wanted to add any visitation hours, that could be up to like another $500. So on the lower end of costs, we're looking at about $750, $800. And that's with urn and cremation and processing included, but depending on if you wanted to have that urn placed in a family plot or if you wanted to have that at your home, you know, there's other things that can be added on. I think burial is definitely more expensive, and these prices for vouchers included burial or cremation, but it didn't include a cost of a casket, which can go anywhere from $250 to $5,000, depending on what you want.
How much you wanted to spend or could spend.
Right. So, you know, there's quite a range, and I think the whole thing about infant loss is that there isn't a standard expectation of what's supposed to happen next in terms of the funeral and people coming to visit, and that whole funeral process that the American consciousness associates with adult death, I think is just not there. We don't have a framework for infant loss, and I think that's why their prices are lower, but I think that's also why they don't expect the visitation and they don't expect the chapel services to be a part of that package, because people don't really necessarily know what to do to ritualize it. And that was kind of the glaring thing on the menu, is that the children's costs include all the fees and the services, but not the community aspect of it. It's just not, it's not included as a package because most of the families aren't taking advantage of that process, and so it's add-on.
So let me add on to what you're saying for the sake of this, which is becoming a lesson. It's interesting living in the community. I love the Bay Area, and there's certainly a lot of religion going on in the Bay Area. But it's like, what I have noticed that people don't like actually actively use or engage with their religion. And exactly what you're saying, in a time like this, a death of a baby, I know as a Catholic, there's all kinds of stuff you could be doing. In my faith around the death of a child, we've gone through it in our family. A miscarriage is cause for a mass prayer and public something about that. You know, even if you just went one-on-one to visit with your pastor and have your pastor pray for you, or if you had your stillborn baby, the stillborn baby receives the Mass of the Angels, which is a public event. The family, the whole congregation, if the family wants, can attend, and everyone can grieve together. So along the lines of having this stuff, this important information about how the funeral homes operate, I think along the lines of the book that I gave you guys last time to take a look at, How to Be a Perfect Stranger, for us to be aware of the rules and regs about life, death, and birth, and all of the different religious and spiritual traditions, and to offer that to our clients. Because for some, and then some people will say no, and some people will receive it and then be comforted in it. For some reason here, I've seen a lot, maybe it's a big city thing too, that folks don't have a negative feeling about their religion of origin, but they're just not in it.
Disconnect, maybe.
They're disconnected, or they were abused in it, you know, things like that. And then, you know, it's an opportunity to look again and see how there could be some things that were given to you in your childhood that could be helpful to you right now. Doesn't mean you sign up or change or whatever, but your client that we've been processing about off and on has a rich spiritual life, rich ancestral connections, and it's totally serving her right now.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, she didn't necessarily, she actually did do this herself. And the reason I wasn't so involved with this process was because we were at Al Debates, and they said to the father, like, do you want us to make the phone call for you to the place? Like, they did offer to start process of that going. And they gave them a packet of, you know, papers and resources and like who they needed to call, which was helpful, I think.
Do they mind sharing those resources?
I can ask them if I can look at it, and see if
tell
it's
them
something that we received.
helping to build this program.
And I think Fauch's was helpful in that I think they understand that when you look at their menu, I mean, it's overwhelming, not even just emotionally, there's just a lot of information because there are all these different ways we do it. And, you know, do you want a chapel? Do you want visitation hours? Do you want a family only hour? Do you want, you know, people have their ways. And so it's a long menu and there's like a paragraph next to each item or each section. And you know, then you're looking at, and I think the weird part for me was just like, I work in hospitality and entertainment and events. And then I'm looking at like, essentially what's like an a la carte menu of funeral services. And that's like a very disjointed and like, you're like, this, why are there like prices written next to this? Like just looking at it is a weird thing. And I'm not even in the middle of grieving anyone. So yeah, I think these professionals definitely know what they're doing. And the unfortunate challenge is how do we combine that spiritual experience with the rules and regulations and monetized experience of getting somebody officially from potential life to this person is not with us anymore. And there is a lot of paperwork and legal aspect in there. So there's a lot to deal with, and I think having help would be important.
It's sad that there's money involved. $500 is not a lot of money, but for some people, it's everything.
A lot. Yeah.
So I'm wondering, did you, and I know you weren't asked to ask this, but did it come up for you? What if you have a family who had a loss and they didn't have money?
Yeah. I didn't ask. I will just say the all-inclusive without any other frills, I don't really know what to call them, for a stillborn was $400, which is still a lot of money for some people. I did not ask what you would do if a family couldn't afford. My sense is that because there would be no preparation or viewing without a fee, like as far as just like the physical process of dealing with the remains, I think that it would probably be from the hospital straight to the crematory, and we would have to find out what their like lowest process rates is, because I know there's like a $25 cardboard crematorium box that you can have, and that is enough for the process. I don't know though, like, do you bring your own urn? Like, how much does the actual process of the cremation itself cost? Because that's included in their package. So I didn't have like a single number for that.
So you could just have a process which allows you to have your baby cremated and in a box, and you can bring that box to your church or to your home altar. Or...
Yeah, I think you'd have to bring a container because it has to go into the cremation urn process in a box.
Okay.
So that's the cardboard box, and then on the other end you would need some kind of container to have the ashes. Okay. And it's weird, we don't talk about body remains that academically or you know, logistically. So as I was talking to him, I was like, wow, I could see how a lot of questions would come up, and I know what in my mind I'm thinking, okay, this is the process, but who knows what your family would want. And I think something we should talk about, and you've mentioned before, is like, how do you talk about this and when do you talk about this ahead of time, that it's not a scary thing, it's just a, if this happened, what would you want me to do, and like what might be your vision. And that's a hard thing to breach. And I just want to briefly mention the Chapel of Chimes. I didn't talk to them as in depth.
Go for it.
They're bigger and pricier and fancier, for sure. They also have a big, long menu. And some of their prices are not as high. So for stillborn cremation with urn, it was $295, which was actually cheaper than Fauch's.
Interesting.
They have an on-site crematorium, which I think is...
That brings their cost down.
Why. They are a one-stop shop, for lack of a better word, for the entire death and grieving process. And they have funeral directors that work with you one-on-one. So when you're a client, it's basically like if you had a wedding planner. It's somebody comes and they walk you through your options and everything you want.
And they're there for you. They're
there with you like the day of too.
Yeah.
Chapel of Chimes has actually, so Fauch's, I think maybe Chapel does too. Fauch's has a partnership with a grief counselor.
Oh, excellent.
So there's ways you can go through the business side of things, and then they'll direct you to like a professional who's good at helping families deal with grief.
That's very wonderful.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty impressive, actually. I'm not sure about Chapel of Chimes, but they do have funeral arrangers who work with you, who I'm sure have a lot of grief counseling training.
Or can get you to somebody who
Or can get you to somebody you have. So there they had urns of $25 or more. Cremation process for a baby who was stillborn, that's $295. For an infant, it's $395 plus the cost of the urn. So about $420 or so. And then there's like a big 24-hour line that you're supposed to call like any time of day when you're ready to let them know that you have a loss and that they're going to need to come take your loved one. So that's the number that they gave me as like the ultimate number that someone would need to have. And then it's really up to the parents to sign the release, same as before. They always call the family before any cremation happens. It's just standard practice.
to make sure they're ready. That's very common.
Yeah, and so I kind of started asking some of those questions as far as what I had asked, you know, what if they want to change their mind? And he was like, it's really whatever the family wants, and that's why we arrange it with a funeral arranger to like get all these questions answered. And they're also a cemetery, so they do burials there. So that's kind of just between two vendors, so to speak. That's the difference of having a place where everything is in one place, is you do get that more minute control because they're doing everything at the same place. So there's no like, oh, we have to go to this other site to deal with this and bring it back here. There's none of that. It's all at Chapel of Chimes. And someone to walk you through the process. So they were all very kind, and I don't know if they totally knew what a doula was, but I said I'm a doula. I work with pregnant families. Sometimes we experience loss, and I wanted to get some answers. And they were very gracious, and they didn't try to sell me anything, obviously.
Good. That's good.
Yeah, I mean,
It speaks well of these two
institutions.
institutions.
They were very willing to answer my questions, so I appreciated that.
And they are the two of the most like respected funeral establishments in the city. So you chose good folks to talk to.
Yeah, I mean, they were honestly, those were the first two that came up with Google, and I was familiar with both of them, so I chose those. But I was surprised at how much like a wedding or something it was in terms of the different available things, and that they really do have people who are trained to walk you through it. But I do think,
it's a rite of passage.
yeah, I do think those initial phone calls and stuff, like if an auntie or a doula or somebody else can do that, because you have to think about logistical things that I can imagine if I had just lost somebody, like I wouldn't, it's like being in labor, like I just wouldn't have the mind frame to like even think of an answer to that question. Yeah.
It's interesting. A dear friend of mine, her son was killed, and her son's 23. So it was just really interesting. We're having these conversations about losing children of any age, and looking at how she handled it. And how she handled it was in a way that I imagine that I probably would do a similar thing. That she was very precise about how he would look. She was very precise, having him dressed in his favorite color, the exact color. The whole family was in different stages of there's a favorite plaid that he liked to wear and favorite cream that he liked. The whole family was in that color. And she, being the mama bear, like she cannot control that her son is gone, but she could make sure his funeral was beautiful. And funeral directors understand this stuff too, so it was very important. How her son was presented to her was done in a very officious, beautiful way. How he was draped until his mother approached the coffin, and how he was revealed to her. You could see the care. This was also at Chapel of the Chimes, by the way. His viewing, how he was revealed to her was very from the heart, beautiful. Like I was crying. All the women were immediately crying. And these things are so important. I mean, that's the last thing you can do for your child. And I kept saying to her, sweetie, you know, what can I do for you and how can we help you? And she's like, I have to bury him. I just have to bury him, Samsarah. And then, you know, check on me after. Right now, I've just got to do this for him. And I got that. I felt that. And sometimes I think when there's a stillbirth, moms don't feel like they have the right to those feelings, and I think they still have those feelings. And I think there's one of those things that we can actually inspire, like how we encourage moms to take agency in the birth of their child, to take agency in the death too. Like, and how to do it without it being morbid. I think it's a way, it's about us reminding our clients that birth and death are sisters. You know, so we prepare the nursery and everything else just in the back of our minds. It should be rare, but it's a thing that can happen.
I think it's also something that mothers of babies grieve, is that they don't have, not just that, like, that process isn't expected the same way, but they don't have the information. Like, what they're grieving is, like, they never got to find out their kid's favorite color, and they never got to experience, you know, him in his pajamas at 4 or whatever, you know, these memories that we use to, like, most funerals are a celebration of the person and who they were in life. And when you only have a few hours or a few days or no time at all with the being in a live state, it's like, that's part of what you're grieving, is you never got to find out. And so,
well, here, I'll tweak that. You know, there is the pregnancy.
Yes.
The baby's alive.
Yes.
So we can talk about how the baby kicked me in the stomach every day at 2 a.m. when I was trying to sleep, the little booger. I mean, you know, there, and then I think that's something that our culture struggles with, and it has a lot to do with, like, when do we become a human being in this culture? And I think that if we talk to most pregnant ladies, they'd say, my baby's a person right now, right? So if you have, and I've even seen women who've chosen abortion have the same goodbye ritual and honor the time they were pregnant.
Yeah.
Right? So now we have a baby who died maybe before it was born, or a baby that was born and died. That kid had a life. And why shouldn't we gather? The child is now an ancestor.
Yeah.
You know? And so, yeah, let's remember the toys we bought that we will never get to give, or, you know, bury the baby with the favorite stuffed toy the mom couldn't wait to have him or her play with. I mean, yeah, we'll cry a lot. I think this culture is afraid of that. Like, we run away from that. And that's where our healing is, because we have all these brains, the tears have chemicals that help normalize brain chemistry. They heal us. So yeah, we're all gonna just boo-hoo seeing the cute little stuffed elephant that the baby's never gonna play with. But then if there is a public thing about it, then the grief is shared. And it's not just that poor mama or that poor daddy all by themselves, or poor parents all by themselves. So yeah, this is the challenge of the work we're doing, and I feel so proud of us, huh?
Yeah. Once I called, I was like, oh yeah, someone needs to do this for the family. Even if it's not the final decision call, just to find out what the options are, and then come back to the family and be like, I know that there are some options, like, I know you might not feel ready, but I do have those options, and we can discuss them, and I can help you navigate them, because it's a lot.
It is a lot. And we are blessed as doulas to already have tremendous trust and love of our clients. And it just really seems appropriate that we're the ones that they would maybe be willing to hear this from. You know, and a support to the family. And then they can take our information and build on top of it. They may not even use our resources, but we were the first step for them, you know, to heal. And it also, for us as providers, feeling helpless and sad for our clients, this is something we can do to feel that we've helped them.
Something to help.
And
that client did end up calling and was able to go back to the crematorium and hold her baby again. So I think as much as there is a business around death, I do think that death professionals and grieving professionals are sensitive to the range of grieving experiences that people have. And I think I'd like to think that they're not quite as callous as our healthcare system, in that they're willing to, they're willing to negotiate protocol and procedure to help families. And I think having a liaison, though, to help communicate during those changes of mind or those questions is important too.
I think like any profession, I think that they're the wonderful professionals who do a great job, and then there's some jerks.
Probably.
But it's also good for us to kind of have an idea of what the standard is.
Yeah.
So when we know maybe our clients are
Yeah.
not being treated well, or, we can say, oh no, you have to call these people, they will be kinder, or not so money crazy. Also things we can do as doulas is, helping the family put up the GoFundMe. If they need to come up with that, even if it's $295, it could be a lot
Right.
for some families.
Yeah, because there's packages that are like $7,000 if you want to go
If you
that
got
route.
$7,000, go for it. And if, no judgment on that.
I was pleasantly surprised that it wasn't as expensive as I thought it would be. It's still a lot of money, but particularly Chapel of Chimes had some really high prices, but they make it, they try to give you that customizable range, kind of like sliding scale in a sense. I know that we want to have as much control as possible. That's just how we are as humans.
Yeah.
But it made me feel good to know that even Chapel of Chimes, which is a beautiful place, is within a reach for a lot of people. So
Yeah, you could come up with $295.
yeah.
That'd be a quick GoFundMe.
Yeah.
So good work, very good work.
Thank
Good
you.
research.
Yeah.
Excellent. We turn it.
Thanks for watching.
Bye.